In this section, I'm going to show you some preparations that you can make to your project to make it much easier to mix. And so before I go back out to the project window, take a look at the mix console, especially at the bottom, and you'll notice that all of the track colors are currently gray. So I'm going to show you how to change the colors of the tracks and the corresponding mix console channels. So to do that, I'm going to get back to the project window by typing F3 to get rid of the mix console. Then I'm just going to type F2 to get my transport panel back. And now if we look at all the tracks that have been recorded, and I'm going to use my mouse wheel here to scroll through them from top to bottom, you'll notice that all the tracks themselves and the events that are contained on those tracks are all the same color of gray. Now, if you're like me, you probably had the colors set during the recording. However, a lot of my clients, I've noticed, don't do that. And what they end up with is this sort of gray, unspectacular looking project window. So when you colorize the tracks and the events, it makes it much easier to get a visual idea of what sort of instruments you're currently looking at. For example, I make all of my drum tracks yellow. There's a long story behind that, but what I want to do now is take all the drum tracks and change their colors. So let's start with the very, very first track, this kick inside track, and I'm going to come over here to the inspector, make sure that you have the inspector tab and not the visibility tab selected, and then I'm going to come to this little caret next to the track name, and I'm going to choose the color of yellow. And you'll notice that when I do that, it changes the track color itself, and it changes the event color to the same color. And then if I were to go back to the mix console very quickly by typing F3, you'll notice that that very, very first track is now this color of yellow. So now I'm going to go back to the project window, and I could continue to go through that track list and change the colors simply by selecting another track, which I like to do by using the arrow down key on my computer keyboard. Then I can click here, change the color, click here again, change the color. So every time you type that down arrow, it moves through the tracks. Or you can also do this in the mix console. So I'm going to type F3 again and then F2 to get rid of my transport panel. And you can see that if you hover your mouse pointer over the far right side of that channel, you get the select color drop down. So if you click on that, then you can choose yellow. So what I'm going to do is quickly go through and take all of those tracks that comprise the drum tracks. I think there's 11 of them. And I'm just going to change all of their colors to yellow. And that way, when I look at the project window, you'll now notice that all of the tracks themselves are yellow and the events on them are yellow. So now let's go through the rest of the track list. So I'm going to click and drag my scroll bar across here so that I can see more of these tracks. Now the bass tracks are going to be red, so I'm going to choose red for those tracks. And then all the guitars are going to be purple. Although I'm going to change the first 5 to a slightly different color of purple because these were all one particular take. So I'm going to use different shades of purple to depict different takes of those guitars. So there's the first 5. The next 5 are going to be a slightly different color of purple, more like a violet. So I'm going to make those 5 guitar tracks all violet. And then there are also some solo guitar tracks, which happen last here. So I'm going to scroll over here a little bit more. Here's the next 5 tracks, which are the solo tracks. So I'm going to make those this very, very almost pink color. And then finally, I'm going to get to the keyboards. And the keyboards are going to be green. Just get this last guitar track. So here's the first keyboard track, the electric piano track. So I'm going to make that green. And then there's the MIDI track, which I'll tell you about in another tutorial in just a moment. And we're going to make that a slightly different color of green. And then there's the vocals. I'm going to make the lead vocal kind of blue. And then the last few vocal tracks right here, I'm going to make those a slightly different color of blue, just so I can tell those apart. And that will colorize all of those channels on the mix console, so it makes it much easier to see where a series of channels begins and where they end. And then if I go back out to the project window, you can see that all of those colorations make it much easier to zero in on what track you're editing and what channel you're mixing. And now that I have those colors changed, I'm going to save a new version of this project. You can see that I have version R14 as a tracking mix, but I'm just going to save this as a new version. So I'm going to go to the File pull-down menu and select Save As, and I'm going to store this in the Impasse project folder, and I'm just going to change the name of this to R15. That's Mix Revision 15. Now, all the revision numbers before that are just a convention that I use to keep track of different versions of this project from recording to mixing. So some of the early recording revisions would be like 1, 2, or 3, and then as I added more and more and more tracks, that revision count gets higher. That way I can swim upstream and get to an older version of the project if I ever needed to. So now that I have this saved as revision 15, I'm going to hit save. And now in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use folder tracks.